Welcome to another deep dive. This time, it's the book of Joshua. Leadership, faith, battles, it's all there. We're going to be using an academic study guide from the Instituto Bíblico do Brasil, by the way.
Oh, that's a great resource. Really gets into the theology and how it connects to us even now.
Right. It's amazing how these ancient stories still speak to us today. And get this, we're going to uncover some pretty cool stuff.
Like what?
Well, did you know Joshua's name wasn't originally Joshua? It was Oseas. The name change actually reflects a huge change in his role in God's plan.
Interesting.
Oh, and we're going to talk about how an entire city's walls collapsed because of, well, a pretty unusual battle strategy.
I'm intrigued already. And what was the other thing you mentioned? Something about a woman and an act of faith.
Ah, yes, her story actually mirrors a super important moment back in Exodus. But let's start with Joshua. So, Oseas, which means he who is saved, became Joshua, meaning God is salvation.
Wow. That's not just a name change, it's a total identity shift.
Totally. It's like going from passively receiving God's grace to actively being part of his plan, like stepping into leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk about leadership training. He spent 40 years with Moses in the wilderness.
Seriously, that's like the ultimate leadership boot camp. But the big test comes when they finally get to Canaan, the promised land. After 40 years of wandering, it's the crossing of the Jordan River that gets me every time.
It's a total miracle. I mean, the priests just step into the water and the whole river stops.
Right. Such a powerful image of God intervening. It makes you think about the Red Sea, too. Are they connected somehow, do you think?
Good point. They both mark a transition, right? The Red Sea, it was going from slavery to freedom, but the Jordan, it's moving from freedom to something even deeper, a life set apart, sanctified.
So it's not just about escaping something bad, it's about moving toward holiness. That's powerful.
Yeah.
But things get pretty intense after that dramatic entrance, right?
Oh, yeah. Jericho is next.
The fall of Jericho. I think everyone knows that story, even if they've never read Joshua.
It's definitely a memorable one. You've got this city, seemingly unbreakable, strong defenses, and then God tells the Israelites to use this, well, let's just say it's a very unusual battle strategy.
It's not exactly something you'd find in a military textbook. A march around the city for 7 days?
Right. Sounds more like a parade than a siege.
Yeah.
But there's got to be something deeper going on.
I've always wondered about that. What's the deal with the marching? And why 7 days specifically?
Well, the number 7 in the Bible, it often represents completeness, perfection. So maybe here it shows the Israelites totally surrendering to God, trusting his timing. And the marching itself, maybe it's about them putting their faith into action, obeying even when it doesn't make logical sense.
So it's not just about winning, but showing their trust in God.
Exactly, and the walls collapsing after a shout. Some scholars think the shout itself didn't do it. Maybe it was the marching, the psychological impact of this weird ritual that really wore down the defenders.
That's really interesting. So it wasn't just brute force. It was faith, obedience, and maybe even psychological warfare. Jericho isn't the only battle, though, right?
You're right. Things don't always go so smoothly for the Israelites. Remember Ai?
Oh, right. Ai was a smaller city, but it really tripped them up.
And it all comes down to disobedience. One guy, Achan, do you remember what he did?
He took some of the loot from Jericho, even though God said everything should be destroyed.
Right. And that one act of disobedience, it has huge consequences for the whole community. They get totally defeated at Ai. It's like a lesson in communal accountability.
Wow. One person's actions affecting everyone. Makes you think about the choices we make.
Absolutely. Achan's story brings up all these questions about God's justice, mercy. The Old Testament, we often see the law applied very strictly severe consequences for disobedience.
It does make you appreciate the focus on grace and forgiveness in the New Testament.
It does. But even in Achan's story, you see that confessing and repenting, those are important, even if there are still consequences.
Yeah, good point. It's not just about avoiding punishment, but about admitting you were wrong, trying to make things right. But you know what else was tricky? Those Gibeonites.
Oh, they were sneaky. They knew God had told the Israelites to wipe out all the Canaanite nations, so they came up with this whole plan to save themselves.
Pretending to be from far away with those worn-out clothes and moldy bread. They really went all out.
Right. But why did the Israelites fall for it?
Well, it seems they didn't ask God before making that treaty. Maybe they were feeling compassionate or just wanted to avoid more fighting. But in the end, it was a test of their obedience, and they failed.
And that had consequences down the line, didn't it?
It did. That treaty with the Gibeonites caused all sorts of problems later on.
Yeah.
It shows how even what seems like a small act of disobedience it can have huge ripple effects.
Really emphasizes the need to seek God's guidance in everything.
Yeah, we can't rely on our own wisdom. So we've got these big themes emerging: obedience, God's power, the challenges of leadership, and it feels like there's a lot more to come.
It really does feel like a drama, doesn't it? With all these twists and turns, choices people make, and then God's hand in it all. And talk about drama, the Conquest gets even bigger now.
Right, it goes from those smaller battles to full-on campaigns all across Canaan.
Yeah, like they kick it into overdrive. We're
Right.
talking major battles against powerful kings now. Adonizedek of Jerusalem, Jabin of Hazor.
No more messing around.
Hmm.
They're really establishing themselves, fulfilling that promise God made way back. Oh, and what about those Anakim?
The giants.
Yeah, the ones who scared the Israelite spies back in Moses' time. Can you imagine facing them?
It's like they're straight out of a myth, almost. But here's the thing. In Joshua, the Israelites actually overcome these giants. God empowers them to do it. It's like even the biggest obstacles, you can overcome them with faith.
That's a really encouraging thought. What happens after the conquest, though? They've won the battles, they've got the land. What then?
Well, they've got to divide this huge territory between the 12 tribes, right? And get this, they use the system of casting lots, basically letting chance decide who gets what.
Casting lots. Sounds a little random.
Right. But it shows how much they trusted God. They believed God would guide the outcome, make sure it was fair.
So it's not just rolling the dice, it's about letting God lead. Wait, what about the Levites? Wasn't there 13 tribes?
Good catch. The Levites, they were the priests, kind of a special case. They didn't get land like the others. They got cities scattered throughout the other tribes' territories.
So their inheritance was different because of their role as spiritual leaders.
Exactly. Their job was to serve God and the people, not to farm or become rich. It reminds me of Caleb, actually. He and Joshua, the only two faithful spies way back when they first checked out Canaan.
Oh, yeah. Talk about loyalty. He got a good deal, right?
He did. Gets his land in Hebron, just like he wanted. Shows how God stays true to those who trust him, even when everyone else doubts. But it doesn't stop there. We've also got the cities of refuge.
Okay, I've heard of those, but
Yeah.
remind me, what were they for again?
Okay, imagine this. If someone accidentally killed another person, the victim's family could just take revenge, like
Right.
kill the offender.
Whoa. Intense.
Yeah, it was called blood vengeance, and it could cause a violence that went on forever.
So these cities of refuge were meant to stop that.
Exactly. If you accidentally killed someone, you could run to one of these cities and be safe from revenge.
Like safe havens. A way to make sure justice wasn't just about revenge.
Right. It's really interesting how they tried to deal with those big questions: justice, revenge, forgiveness. And along with the cities of refuge, we also see certain cities set aside for the Levites. Shows how important they were as spiritual leaders.
It's amazing how much we learn about their society and religion from these old laws and customs. You know what I've always been curious about, though? That whole secret altar thing.
Oh yeah, that one. Sounds like something out of a spy movie. Tribes building altars in secret.
Yeah. So the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, they'd already got their land east of the Jordan, right?
They settled there even before the main conquest.
So why build another altar later on?
That's what's so interesting. The other tribes, they see this huge altar and freak out. They think their brothers are starting some rival religion, splitting the nation.
Yikes. Family drama.
Total drama. But as the story unfolds, we find out the altar wasn't meant to replace the one at Shiloh. It was like a copy, a reminder of their shared history, that they were all still united.
So it was a big misunderstanding, almost caused a huge fight. Reminds you that communication is so important,
Yeah.
especially when things are changing.
Absolutely. And as Joshua gets older, he starts giving these farewell speeches.
The classic passing the torch, huh? Sharing his wisdom, hoping it sticks with them.
Yep. And his message is simple. Remember God's faithfulness. Be obedient, and don't fall for the idols of the surrounding nations.
It's like he's looking back on his whole life, the good and the bad, and boiling it all down to those core truths. And then, after all that adventure and leadership, he dies at 110.
What a life. A fitting end for the man who led them into the promised land. And there's this detail about burying Joseph's bones in Shechem, fulfilling a promise from generations ago.
It's like closing the loop, connecting back to those early leaders and that covenant God made.
A powerful image of how God keeps his promises across generations. But, thinking about Joshua's life and legacy, it makes you wonder.
What kind of legacy are we leaving,
Huh?
right? I mean, look at Joshua. He had to deal with so much, make huge decisions, and his story still impacts us.
It's incredible. And I think it's because we can relate to him. He wasn't perfect, messed up sometimes, but he always tried to follow God.
He was a great leader, but also just a regular person, dealing with doubts, fears, all the stuff that comes with leading people.
Yeah, exactly. And think about what they went through. Crossing the Jordan, Jericho, dividing up the land. It's like a guide for how to overcome our own obstacles.
Totally. We've all got our own Jerichos to face, those things that seem impossible. And sometimes it feels like we're wandering in the wilderness too, trying to reach our own promised land.
It's a good analogy. But the Israelites didn't do it alone, did they? They had God's help the whole way.
And they had to trust him, even when it didn't make sense, like marching around Jericho for a week.
Right. Sometimes faith means getting out of your comfort zone, doing things differently, trusting that God's plan is bigger than what we can grasp.
And even when they messed up, like with AI, they got back on track, learned from it, and kept going.
It's so important. We all make mistakes, but it's what we do after that matters. The Israelites admitted they were wrong, asked for forgiveness, and went back to following God.
Shows it's never too late to turn things around, to get back in line with what God wants.
Yeah,
And that's how you get his blessings.
absolutely. So for me, the biggest takeaway from Joshua is this. We're not alone on this journey. God is always there, guiding us, giving us the strength to overcome anything.
It's about those themes we've been talking about. Obedience, trust, asking for God's guidance, believing in his promises.
And it's about finding our own Jerichos and AIs and asking, how can I be like Joshua? How can I use faith and obedience to face those challenges and really live out God's promises?
That's a great question to think about. It's been awesome exploring Joshua with you. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep digging deeper into the stories that shape us.